The pines whispered above the family campsite, their shadows stretching long and thin as the sun began to sink. Jake kept his fishing rod angled toward the riverbank, half listening to the crackle of the campfire where Mom was heating dinner. His little sister, Lila, had been darting between trees all afternoon, chasing the last golden beams of light. "Stay where we can see you," Mom called. Lila waved in reply, her small form swallowed briefly by the underbrush before reappearing. Jake turned back to the water, distracted by a sudden tug on his line. The catch fought hard, pulling him a few steps down the rocky edge. When he finally reeled in a shimmering trout, he looked up, expecting to see Lila crouched somewhere nearby, grinning at his victory. She wasn't there. "Lila," he called. No answer. The pine needles seemed to absorb his voice. He checked behind the big moss-covered log where she'd been playing. Empty. The fading light made the forest look deeper, endless. By the time Mom noticed his frantic scanning, panic had already set in. They both began shouting her name, moving further from the campsite. Jake's calls grew hoarse, bouncing back to him from the cold walls of trees. Then came a sound, not Lila's voice, but a low rustle somewhere deeper in the woods. Too heavy for a squirrel, too deliberate for the wind. Jake froze, every nerve on edge. Somewhere beyond the pines, something was moving toward the fading light, and it had found her first. Lila hadn't meant to wander so far. One moment she'd been following the flicker of a blue butterfly through the ferns, the next, the sounds of her family were gone, swallowed by the forest's quiet. She tried retracing her steps, but every tree looked the same, every path just another tunnel of green and shadow. The air grew cooler, heavy with the scent of damp earth. When the first howl echoed from somewhere far away, her chest tightened. She'd seen wolves on TV, their beauty softened by the glow of a screen. Out here, the sound was different, raw, endless, and much too close. She found a fallen log and crawled beneath it, clutching her knees. The dim light faded into black, and the forest began its night chorus. Crickets, the distant trickle of water, and something heavy moving through the underbrush. At first, she thought it was her brother, maybe even Mom, coming to find her. But the steps were slow, deliberate, and the ground seemed to tremble with each one. A shape appeared between the trees. Massive. Dark. It stopped a few feet away, the sound of its breathing deep and steady. Lila's heart pounded so hard she thought it might give her away. The creature didn't growl. It didn't leave. It simply stood there watching, its outline framed by the faint glow of moonlight breaking through the canopy. And then, it lay down. Lila stayed frozen under the log, but the warmth of its presence wrapped around her like an invisible blanket. Somewhere in the long silent hours, her fear dulled. She closed her eyes. When she woke to pale morning light, the shape was still there, waiting. Jake hadn't slept. The search teams had combed the campsite perimeter through the night, their flashlights cutting sharp cones through the dark. But no trace of Lila. By morning, a cold mist curled low over the ground. Jake couldn't sit still by the fire anymore, he had to do something. While the rangers discussed routes on their maps, he slipped away toward the riverbank where he'd last seen her. At first, the moss-covered trail was empty. Then he saw it, pressed deep into the wet ground, a footprint far too large to be his own. Wide pads. Long claw marks. Bare. Jake crouched, tracing the edge of the print with his fingers. There were more, leading away from the river, but something stopped him from calling the rangers over. The tracks weren't random. They followed a steady line, almost purposeful, as if the bear had a destination in mind. A few yards ahead, he spotted something small caught in the roots of an old cedar. He reached down and pulled it free, a hair tie. Bright yellow. Lila's favorite. The realization hit like a punch. She'd been here. Recently. But the thought of a bear so close made his stomach twist. Everyone knew what a black bear could do if cornered, or hungry. Still, something about the neat line of tracks tugged at him. The prints weren't scattered or frantic. They looked like they were guiding. From somewhere deeper in the pines, a faint crack echoed. Jake froze, scanning the mist. For a split second, he swore he saw a massive shadow move between the trunks. Not toward him. Away. And Jake, without thinking, began to follow. Lila had never spent 2 nights away from home before, let alone under a sky that felt so enormous it could swallow her whole. By now, hunger gnawed at her ribs, and every sound in the forest had sharpened into something she couldn't ignore. But the bear, her shadow in the trees, never left. That evening, as the light drained from the sky, it appeared again. Not charging. Not growling. Just there. Massive and still, watching from a distance. She noticed something strange. Whenever she wandered too far in one direction, the bear would move ahead of her, cutting her off. If she turned toward the lower slope, where the ground dipped into a gully, it would angle its bulk across the path until she backed away. Slowly, she realized, it wasn't trapping her. It was steering her. The second night brought cold that bit through her thin jacket. She found herself drawn toward the bear's warmth. Though she didn't dare touch it, she curled up near enough to feel heat radiating off its thick fur. In the darkness, she could hear it breathing, slow, steady, unafraid. Somewhere far off, a coyote yipped, joined by others. The bear lifted its head, ears twitching, but stayed put. That stillness was more comforting than words could ever be. Lila didn't know why this wild creature hadn't left her behind, why it seemed to know where she needed to go. All she knew was that for the first time since she'd gotten lost, she didn't feel entirely alone. Above them, the stars wheeled silently across the black sky. And when she finally drifted to sleep, it was with a certainty, strange as it was, that she was being led somewhere she needed to be. Jake had been searching for almost 40 hours without rest. His boots were soaked from crossing creeks, his hands raw from pushing through brambles. The rangers were calling it a suspension until daylight, but he refused to stop. At first light, the forest felt different. Quiet. Expectant. A pale mist clung to the moss and branches, curling like smoke around the tree trunks. That's when he heard it, faint crunches, spaced evenly, like something big was moving through the undergrowth. He followed the sound. Up ahead, through the thinning fog, he saw it, the black bear. Massive, scarred across its shoulder. For a frozen second, Jake's instinct screamed at him to back away. But then, he saw what was behind it. Lila. She stood a few steps back, her face pale and tired, her hair tangled, but she was there. The bear glanced over its shoulder at her, then at Jake, and stepped aside. The movement was almost deliberate, like it was handing her over. Lila. Jake's voice cracked as he sprinted forward. She ran to him, and he caught her up in his arms, lifting her clean off the ground. She smelled of smoke and pine and fear. He held her so tight it hurt. By the time he looked back, the bear was already moving away. No rush. No sound beyond the soft pad of paws against wet earth. Jake wanted to say something, thank you maybe, but the words felt too small for what had just happened. The mist swallowed the bear whole, leaving only the stillness of the clearing and the sound of Lila's breathing against his chest. The rangers arrived within the hour, guiding Jake and Lila back toward the trailhead. She walked with one hand clutched in her brother's, the other brushing against the smooth bark of trees as though memorizing the way. But every few steps, she glanced over her shoulder. There was no sign of the bear. Only shadows in the trees and the whisper of wind through the pines. As they reached the edge of the forest, Lila slowed. It didn't just find me, she said softly. It showed me the way. Her voice was small, but certain. Jake squeezed her hand, unsure how to answer. Maybe no one would believe it. Maybe, in the telling, it would sound like a child's fantasy spun from fear and exhaustion. But he'd seen the way that bear had stepped aside in the clearing. The way it had looked at him. Back at the ranger station, hot chocolate steamed in their hands, and the questions began, maps, routes, timelines. Lila answered what she could, but she left out the moments that felt too strange, too sacred. The breath of the bear in the cold night. The quiet steps that guided her away from danger. Days later, when they returned to the forest's edge to leave a bundle of apples and berries, the gift remained untouched for a week, until one morning, the fruit was gone, and a single paw print, deep and perfect, pressed into the earth where they'd left it. Jake and Lila stood there for a long time, staring at that mark. The path back to safety would grow over in time, swallowed by moss and seasons. But in their minds it would always remain, a trail through mist and pine, led by a silent guardian who asked for nothing in return. And they would never forget it.